like Tulsi because you know what Tulsi stands for. Tulsi, the primary election in 2016, she was the vice chair of the Democratic Party. She did not like what she saw. She thinks you're the voters. She thinks you should be driving this process. And she could tell that things were being arranged so that the voters sort of had the last say, if any say at all. But they are trying to make sure that they are selecting your options for you and maybe even who you ought to vote for. She resigned in protest. And that's been a problem for her ever since. And anyone here think anything's changed since then? No, it's not getting any better, is it? Have you ever felt like maybe somebody's trying to tell you who you need to vote for? If you feel that way, then Tulsi's your person, because she's here for you. Have you ever felt like the divisiveness in this country is being driven by the political leaders and the media in Washington, D.C.? They need that divisiveness. They feed on it, and they're feeding it. It's not helping anyone in this room. It's not helping Americans, and it's breaking us apart. And I only know one candidate who's made this her platform. It's to bring Americans back together and bring the Democratic Party back to the voters. I want to welcome Tulsi Gabbard. Come on up. Where is she? All right.
Thank you, JJ. Thank you. Aloha. I'm right up here in the front. I see people looking in the back. Thank you so much. It's great to see you all here in Provo. Thank you for being here. Good to see you. It's a beautiful day. I was honestly expecting it to be a lot colder when I came here. It was cold when we first landed the other day, but I haven't had to wear a jacket thicker than this, and either my blood is thickening coming from Hawaii, or it's just really nice. Maybe it's both, I don't know. Thank you all so much for being here. I want to say a couple of quick thank yous. Before we get started, Jeremiah Clark, who works here, has played a tremendous role in making this event possible today. Thank you, Jeremiah. Thank you. And from his team here, we have Dennis Tavana. Is Dennis still around? Dennis is making sure we're all safe here today. Thank you, Dennis. And Larry, who is making sure our audio is functioning well. We had some issues last night, so we're glad to have you here, Larry. Thank you so much. Before we get started, I want to share with you something special about today. It's my husband's birthday. He's really mad at me right now. But I am wondering if you can all help me. This is happening. This is happening. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Abraham. Happy birthday to you. You gotta come blow out your candles. He's focused on his mission. He's filming, we're live streaming. Hi everybody, thanks for wishing Abraham a happy birthday. There you go. Here, I'll hold it. I'm going to hear about this later, trust me. Thank you, honey. This campaign has been such an amazing experience that we've been able to share. He's been filming and sharing people's stories, sharing the conversations that we're having here today and across the country, making it possible for a whole lot of other people to tune in from home through the live stream. And I'm grateful for you, honey, and all that you do for us. Thank you very much. All right, down to business. Back to work. We've spent the last few days here. I think we got in late Thursday night, and it's been a really incredible experience going and visiting some of your universities and just holding conversations like this and seeing the diversity in ideas and perspectives that we're all coming in and sharing this space around, and how even though we're coming in as strangers, we are walking out understanding how connected we all are, and how when we recognize the power that's in our hands as voters, as Americans, we see the path forward to bring about the change we need to see. The divisiveness in this country right now is tearing us apart. We are being divided on things, race, religion, politics, who you voted for, who you voted against, what cable news channel you watch or don't watch. So many things being used as wedges to try to divide us further, only being exacerbated by this cancel culture that says if someone says something that offends you, even in a small way, then you're canceled. Your voice should not be allowed to be heard. It's really troubling when you take a step back and look at what's going on around us and how this really directly undermines the very foundations of our country, the freedoms enshrined in our Constitution, and the things that have been celebrated for so long, really recognizing that our strength lies in our ability to bring different experiences, different backgrounds, different ideas and perspectives on how we solve problems. But when you look at Washington, you see gridlock and paralysis and hyper-partisanship and an unwillingness to sit down and have a meaningful dialogue that's based on respect, that's based on wanting to build a greater understanding so that leaders in Washington can fulfill that mission of service. Service to every single one of you. The one thing that unites that should unite every single member of Congress. On President's Day, I was looking through Instagram, and there's a lot of different people sharing quotes from their favorite presidents or their most inspiring quotes. And there was one that I'd never heard before from Abraham Lincoln that really spoke to how we bridge these divides. The quote very simply said, "I don't like that man. I need to know him better." Just think about that. And when you look at his leadership during a terribly divisive time in our country, where he warned how a house divided against itself cannot stand, and we look to where we are today, and I meet people every day who really are distraught, who are cynical and disheartened, wondering, how do we get past this? How do we bridge these divides? How do we get to a place both in Washington and in our own communities where we can once again feel that same sense of unity and pride in who we are as Americans and know what that actually means? Have a vision for the kind of country that we want to live in and that we want to leave behind for our kids. And I think that quote from Abraham Lincoln really speaks very clearly to how we do that. Both every one of us as individuals, maybe thinking about people in our own lives who maybe you've lost touch with because of some of these differences, thinking about those who we have disagreements with, increasing that understanding. It's something we absolutely need leaders in Washington to heed, to follow. I don't know that man. I need to get to know him better. Imagine where we would be if this was, kind of the ruling guideline. That as we bring our views on different issues together, rather than just screaming at each other, taking the time to listen. And maybe getting to a place where you still disagree at the end of it, but having increased that respect when you know that while we may agree to disagree on some issues, we're coming from the same place. of love for our country, of a deep care and concern for the direction that we are headed, and therefore a desire to take action together to get us to where we need to go. This was something that I had to tackle immediately when I was elected to Congress in 2012. Getting elected as a Democrat, entering into a strong Republican majority in the House, and immediately being told that I shouldn't even try to pass a bill because Republicans they would have no interest in bringing my bill to the House floor. Maybe I could give speeches on the House floor, go on TV, talk about the issues I cared about, but that would be the maximal impact that I could make until Democrats took over, and then I'd be able to pass legislation. This made no sense to me whatsoever. So I immediately started thinking, how do I reach out? How do I build relationships? This is a very practical thing. It's not some esoteric theory that we have to wonder about. It's a practical thing. I went to the most basic bridge building universal language that I know of in my life and from my culture, and that is the language of food. Who speaks this language here? All right, we're on the same page. So I started thinking about, okay, well, I've got to be able to introduce myself to my Republican colleagues and Democrat colleagues, make sure that they get to know who I am so I can represent the voices of my constituents. I called my mother back in Hawaii. I want to recognize my aunt and uncle who are here today, by the way. They live here in Utah, David and Eileen. They know what I'm talking about here. I asked my mother to make 434 boxes of her amazing macadamia nut toffee for every one of my new colleagues and soon-to-be new friends. She said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. They've had the toffee. You know how good it is. It's a great idea. I said, okay, thank you. I have one more favor on top of that. Can you make another 435 larger boxes of toffee for the staff of every member of Congress? Yeah. She wasn't as vocal as you were, but she was silent for a moment on the phone, and I could tell she was thinking, like, okay, I got to go to Costco, get so many more macadamia nuts. It's going to take me this much longer to make that much toffee. But she understood why it was important. I worked as a legislative aide for one of our U.S. senators from Hawaii for a couple of years between my two deployments in the most friendly way. They've been married over 51 years. They compete on the tennis court every day. But Dad calls me and says, honey, I want you to know I'm helping your mom. I'm the quality control officer. No joke, he took one piece. He wanted me to know he's taking one piece out of every single pan that she poured just to make sure it was okay. And so while they were working that out in Hawaii, I was in DC and I just started handwriting personal notes to every one of my colleagues, introducing myself and signing every note saying, I look forward to serving with you. We started to deliver these little gifts of aloha, as I call them, and I was really struck by how quickly I started to get a response. That on the House floor during votes, which usually happen, 1 to 3 times a day on average, it's the only time that all members of Congress are in the same room together. There were Republicans, chairmen of powerful committees, people who had a lot of seniority from different parts of the country, people who normally I probably would not have given me the time of day. As a freshman Democrat from Hawaii, what do I got to do with her? Nothing, really. But they were coming and walking across the House floor, looking for me and finding me just to say thank you. A lot of them followed that up with, gosh, the toffee was so good, I ate it all. Do you have any more that I can take home to my family this weekend? Can you hook me up? And then most importantly, just asking me, tell me what your constituents in Hawaii are concerned about. What are the issues that you want to work on here, now that you're in Congress? Let's work together. This very simple, small gesture of reaching out with respect, no preconditions, no purity tests, no, hey, I saw this person on TV and I hated what they said, so no toffee for you. No. Reaching out to every single one of my colleagues, bringing us together, reminding us about this mission of service. Let us serve together. And it was this small gesture of reaching out as people, person to person, politics aside, that laid a very strong foundation that enabled me as a Democrat in a Republican majority to get legislation passed. The very first bill that I introduced into Congress was a bill related to, it was called the Helping Heroes Fly Act. We passed this in a record period of time through both the House and the Senate, signed into law by President Obama, something that everybody said was impossible to do. Even with amendments to major pieces of legislation, was able to get those amendments on the House floor. Even those that people said would be dead on arrival because Republican leadership told their members, vote against the Gabbard Amendment. Because I had those relationships, I got my phone calls returned, and I was able to make my case to my colleagues about why this provision was so important. Some of them they heard me out. Some of them at the end said, okay, I hear you, but I don't agree on this. Let's talk next time. Many others, I hear you, it makes sense. You have my support, enabling me to get things done that people said I shouldn't even make an effort to do because of the hyper-partisan gridlock in Washington. So this is a practical example of how we break down these barriers in Washington. It is a practical example of the kind of mindset and leadership that I will bring as president, where every single one of you, every single American has my personal commitment that as I treat all of you with respect, I will lead with those same principles that come from this soldier's heart of respect and honor, integrity, and service. Because you deserve, every American deserves the peace of mind of knowing that the leaders that you choose to send to Washington have your back. That rather than being driven by an agenda of, okay, well, my party's in power, we're gonna do anything and everything to keep power, or my party's not in power, we're gonna do anything and everything to get that power back, which is what's happening now. Instead, having leaders who are truly driven by a sincere desire to serve. That when you cast your vote for them, you know that they have that responsibility to uphold that promise, to hear your voice, to listen to your concerns, and to build partnerships to be able to address them, to deliver results for you. This is what it means for us as Americans to stand together, work side by side, to get away from this government of, by, and for the powerful elite that we have right now that's leaving the rest of us behind, and instead really bring to fruition this government of the people, by the people, and for the people. The reason I'm starting with this, instead of coming here and giving you a whole list of my positions on issues from A to Z, is because unless we break through this gridlock, we can talk all day and all night about a grand vision or a grand plan. But if you walk out of here without the confidence that I will be able to execute that plan, regardless of which way the political winds blow in Congress, then what does it all mean? You will have wasted your time. I'm not interested in doing that. Time is the most precious thing that every single one of you has to give. Once given, you can never take it back. And I value that. And I understand that why we are here is to set that course, to chart that course, build that path forward where we can bridge these divides and ensure that we have the government that the American people deserve. All right, we have a lot of people here, so I want to open it up to questions and answers here. We want to try to get to as many people as possible. We have one or two microphones that be running around? Here, I'll start with you. You're close. I can hand you mine.
So my name is Christian. First of all, mahalo and thank you for your service. Give it up for her service. And in all honesty, it's Americans like you that literally are warriors like you. I'm not going to say soldier, I'm going to say warrior. For people like you that are fighting for our country so very often. And so I do have 3 quick questions for you.
3. You get 1.
Okay, sorry.
We got a lot of people here.
I apologize. So
That's all right.
Okay, something that's very deep to me because I have seen. I'm originally from Miami, Florida, and I have seen, even here in Utah, suicide be such a big issue. So if you were to be elected president, what would you do about that?
Thank you. Thank you. I hope you don't feel disrespected. If we run out of questions, we'll come back for your other 2. All right. Thank you for raising this serious issue, though. How many people here have been affected by someone who has taken their own life? This is exactly your point, that so many communities, families all across this country, unfortunately, are seeing the loss of loved ones. There's no simple or easy answer to this. There's a few things that I can point out that I think we need to address in order to help prevent these increasing numbers of suicide that we have in our country. There's people end up in that place for different reasons, but we look at the lack of access to mental health professionals, to mental health treatment, from everywhere in our schools to our communities, that has to be addressed. We have to lift the stigma that comes from those who are afraid to ask for help because they're afraid of how people may judge them. Oh, you're crazy, or you're this, or you're less than, or you're damaged goods. I've seen this a lot with my brothers and sisters in uniform. Warriors, as you say, who have faced the greatest adversity with incredible courage, and just to get to that point where if they realize they need help, they often have a hard time asking for it. But even when that happens, unfortunately, and I think this is one of the contributors to the still very high number of veteran suicides in this country, is even when asking for help, that help isn't there. Lifting that stigma and making sure that as much as we all talk about healthcare in this country and the need to address healthcare needs, usually that's only limited to our physical health and well-being, where that needs to be comprehensive and all-inclusive of both our physical and mental health. The third thing I'll say on this that I think is important, that sometimes when people talk about mental health, you talk about, okay, well, I'm going to go to a psychiatrist and they'll give me some drugs. We're seeing a lot of people who are continuing to be hurt and in pain and suffering because the only answers they've gotten is more drugs, rather than actually trying to deal with the underlying issue that's causing this angst or anxiety or depression or post-traumatic stress or all of these other things. And so getting to that root cause and providing the avenues and opportunities for people to heal is important. We are not, any one of us, made exactly like another. We are all very unique. What may work for one person may not work for another person. So recognizing that holistic approach in a very spiritual and foundational way to being able to truly help people find peace is what we have to do as a country.
I'm glad you're here, Tulsi. I really wanted to meet you and hear about you and learn about you.
What's your name?
George. What's yours?
Thanks for being here,
Tulsi.
George.
We have a man up there in Washington, D.C. that apparently doesn't like anybody that doesn't look like himself. And, I think I just got back from Colorado Springs and wasted 2 days that I'll never get back again.
What were you doing there?
Had a rally.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering, as far as his position on immigration and yours, I would like to know how you would address the immigration issue, different than this man that we have now.
I think it's important as we look at the question of immigration and how broken this system is, that we recognize that this is not a Democrat versus Republican issue. That there are a lot of folks, a lot of families, both those who are immigrant families already here, those who have been separated from their loved ones because of a 15-year backlog and trying to get a visa to be able to bring their spouse or their child here to this country, or the failures and the lack of resources that we're seeing happening at the border. There are so many different aspects of this broken system that I would fix as president and bring together a coalition of Democrats and Republicans to do so. This has to do with border security, making sure that, no, we don't waste money on a wall from sea to shining sea, but that we look at our objective. As a nation requires borders, secure borders. So look at what would actually be effective to do so, cost-effective and effective in actuality. Look at the resources that are necessary at our borders that are not there right now, and enact the kind of comprehensive immigration reform to address the many aspects within our system that aren't working. I mentioned families, economic opportunity. I've met with farmers, manufacturers, coffee shop owners who talk about how hard it is for them to be able to find workers and to be able to work through the legal system to bring in guest workers or temporary workers from other countries to work those seasonal jobs. Really looking at what are the needs of our economy and what are the needs of our families here in this country, and fix this system to be able to address those needs. We've got to be able to get past the gridlock and the partisanship, though, that has stood in the way of any meaningful comprehensive immigration for so long. That's a short answer. It's a big topic. We can dive deep into any one of those different areas, but I take a very practical and objective-based approach to how we can make sure that our immigration system is both humane and working for us.
So my question's on foreign policy. So in the late 19th century, as you know, the United States and Britain entered the Great Rapprochement, where they formed an alliance to counter Imperial Germany. My question is, do we need a similar rapprochement and alliance with Russia to counter the rise of China?
No. My opinion. I'll tell you why. It's a good question. It's a good question because it speaks to the increasing tensions that we are seeing both between the United States and China, but also between the United States and Russia, two nuclear-armed countries, and what are the consequences of that? I think that we need to, well, here's my view on this. As president, we need to change our view on this great powers battle that lies before us, and instead look at it from a new perspective. With these increasing tensions that are currently existing, we're entering into a new Cold War that nuclear strategists are warning us all against, that this combined with a nuclear arms race is pushing us closer and closer to the brink of nuclear catastrophe. Whether intentional or accidental, this is the reality of where this path leads us that would lead to the destruction of our world, period. I'm not for that. I made the decision to run for president because of this nuclear wake-up call that we had in Hawaii back in 2018, where in those moments, how many of you heard of that? You know what I'm talking about? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. Where in those moments, we got this alert saying, missile incoming, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. I want to ask you to think about here as we're gathered here today, this Saturday afternoon. if we got this message right here, our phones started buzzing and going off, where would you find shelter from a nuclear missile headed our way? There's nowhere to go. That's what we realized. That's what families across Hawaii who are absolutely terrified, wondering, okay, we've got 15 minutes, where are we gonna go? The government is telling us, missile incoming, seek immediate shelter, this is not a drill. Where's the shelter? Our leaders have failed us in pushing us to this place, but it doesn't have to be this way. This is why I'm running for president, to bring that experience that I've gained from my service in Congress now for 7, going on 8 years, focused on foreign policy and national security, combined with my own experience serving in the military now for almost 17 years, to be able to lead as commander-in-chief, to shift our foreign policy away from a foreign policy of confrontation and toward a foreign policy of cooperation. Being able to exercise all of the tools of diplomacy to be able to both negotiate and work out our differences with countries, whether it be China or Russia or other countries on different issues, while also maintaining and encouraging that space for us to be able to work together on areas of shared and common interest. Things like counterterrorism, things like preventing an epidemic of a coronavirus. There are a number of different areas that serve our best interests in this country and the interests of people in the world if we are able to de-escalate these tensions rather than further fan the flames of conflict and nuclear war. There's no good outcome to that. There is no winning of that race. This is the greatest existential threat that we face in this country and on the planet, and it requires courage and leadership and strength to de-escalate those tensions. I will call for a summit between the US and Russia and China right after getting into the Oval Office to begin this process, to start to rebuild what leaders like Reagan and Gorbachev negotiated with the INF Treaty. Things like JFK meeting and working with Khrushchev, understanding that we cannot to look at how can we be prosperous and at peace along with other countries in the world. I'll take somebody on this side. Yes, ma'am. Aloha.
My name is Osipao Pamela Tafua McMoore. I have followed your political career since you started in Hawaii. And my family and I have recently moved here to Orem, Utah.
Okay.
And so I was really excited when I heard that you were coming into town. So welcome.
Thank you.
My question to you is, I'm from Samoa. I'm Samoan, from American Samoa, and also with roots in Western Samoa. My concern is with China's influence in the Pacific. I don't believe that a lot of people understand the dynamics of China's influence in this area. When we're talking about the Pacific Ocean, it's a vast area of real estate. And right now, China is very strong. It has taken over some of the small island kingdoms in Samoa, including Tonga. And of course, Western Samoa, which is right next to American Samoa, territory of the United States, is now pretty much taken over by China. And it's only about 30.
Do you mean economically, or there's military, or, okay.
They are building huge wharves and airports in this small island of independent Samoa. And it's right next door to the territory of the United States, American Samoa. It is concerning. And I'd like to know if DC is even looking at this problem. Because as we're talking and talking about China and its influence, it's really there right now. Yeah. So I just want to know what your position is on that.
Thank you. here's when we look at where our taxpayer dollars have been going and where so much of our military has been focused, we've expended trillions of our taxpayer dollars on waging regime change wars, nation building missions that follow this new Cold War nuclear arms race, all of which have not made us any safer and have made it very difficult for us to be able to have the resources that we need to serve urgent needs and interests of people here in our communities right here at home. Did for a long time across different parties, different administrations, has been one of going around and being the world's police rather than leading with the foreign policy that I believe we should have, that I would lead with, that is focused on building relationships, building partnerships, treating other countries with respect, and investing in that approach. There are some other Pacific Island territories and nations who have been looking for more opportunities to build partnerships with our country and who aren't getting the time of day in Washington. And so I'm kind of painting the bigger picture here when you look at how many regime change wars has China waged in the last 50 years, in the last 100 years. None. China's got a long-term plan on what they envision for their country and what kind of impact they want to have on the world. I'm really focused on getting us out of this reactionary position where we're constantly reacting. Well, what is China doing? What is Russia doing? What is this country doing? What is that country doing? How about what we're doing? What kind of force do we want to have? What kind of positive impact do we want to have on the world, on people in other countries, in the territories, whether it be in the Pacific or the Middle East or in Europe or in Africa, and all of these different regions of the world, leading from the front and leading with policies that are really rooted in the values that we cherish here in this country. Your question doesn't have an easy answer, but it has to do with what is our focus as a nation and what kind of approach, relationships, and impact do we want to be able to have here at home and with other countries. Thank you. Take somebody from this side. Yes, sir. Oh.
Hi, Tulsi. I'm Michael. So I guess my question is about foreign policy. So I believe you have probably the most experience out of anyone in the field. You're a warrior, like everybody said. Yeah. And I feel like that's a really unique perspective. And with what's named General Soleimani, that was a real interesting situation. If you were in the office of the president, what would you make in that situation? What decision would you take?
What would I have done? Mm-hmm. Let me start by saying my answer is limited in the information that has been shared. So I can tell you with the information that has been shared with us as members of Congress, I would not have made that decision that President Trump made for three important reasons. Number one, again, based on the information that was shared, it did not justify invoking Article 2 of the Constitution to take that action, which means that if President Trump and his administration wants to go to war with Iran, which this was the latest step of an escalation of going to war with Iran, the first step which began with pulling out of the Iran nuclear agreement and many others that were taken after that, then they've got to come to Congress. The Constitution says that Congress is the body that has the authority to decide whether or not we want to go to war, not the president. We're very intentional in understanding the serious consequences of that decision and that no single individual in this country should have the ability to decide that we're going to start a war with another country. So that didn't happen. He didn't come to Congress, didn't make that case. And therefore, the action that he took was unconstitutional, had no legal authority that exists based on the Constitution. Here's the overarching national security concerns that prove that his overall policy towards Iran and this specific action have actually made us less safe as a country. Number one, very specifically, our troops in Iraq, their mission for being there that was authorized by Congress was to go after ISIS and Al-Qaeda, to try to prevent them from being able to reconstitute themselves and pose an increased threat and have a resurgence. That's what they were there focusing on. As soon as that attack took place, our US commander in Iraq announced publicly, we have to completely shift focus of all of our US troops in Iraq away from the terrorist groups that attacked us on 9/11, those that still pose a threat to us today, and instead take up this defensive posture against the threat that has now been exacerbated by Iranian forces or Iranian-backed militia. Where does that leave Al-Qaeda and ISIS? Free rein to start to rebuild themselves, to start to pose an increased threat. So that's the first area. The second area is when we look at what Iran is doing today as it pertains to nuclear weapons, they are enriching uranium. They have restarted that program, which is only pushing them closer and closer to being able to have that nuclear weapons capability. This does pose an increased threat to the United States, to our partners and allies in the region and in different parts of the world. So this goes back to really the underlying point. You ask what I would do as commander-in-chief, you have to understand the situation. Have foresight to see, okay, what if I do this, what are the domino effects going to be, and how will that affect our country's national security? These decisions are never clear-cut, black and white, very easy to make. They're always complex situations. But ultimately, those decisions must be made in being able to answer this question. How will this serve our country's national security interests? Will it make the American people more or less safe? And make those decisions based on that. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Jared MacArthur. Thanks for
Hi.
coming. I'm curious what exact proposals you will enact when you're in the White House to incentivize congressmen to work with each other. I think most Americans feel caught somewhere between the two political extremes.
I'm going to ask my mother to make a whole bunch of toffee again as the first step. Getting her ready, getting her primed for that. My first day as president, I will invite leaders from the House and the Senate to the White House to begin the conversation necessary to do what you're talking about, to start to bridge these divides, to start to build a foundation based on trust and respect. This seems like the most obvious thing anyone would do, right? So what's the big deal? The big deal is that for the entire time I've been in Congress, this is my 8th year there, it's breaking news, and it makes headlines anytime leaders from the House and Senate are invited to go to the White House. It's like bird's eye view, probably, a mile away, maybe 2, but it makes breaking news because it hardly ever happens. It hardly ever happens, and usually when it does, you end up with a situation where it's kind of all just a show, where people are coming in and you've got your talking points already pre-drafted, you're gonna have your press conference afterward, you go in, you have the meeting, and you come out already knowing what the outcome is gonna be, which means it's not a real meaningful effort to work out problems on different issues. And so this is the difference of the approach that I would take. Leadership matters, setting that culture of leadership, in building those relationships, just as we're doing throughout my campaign across the country, bringing people together across party lines, saying if we're serious about solving these problems that impact all of us, we gotta work together, and delivering that same approach and that same leadership to members of Congress from all across the country, who in many cases actually feel like they have been left out of the conversation, when you really only end up with about 4 or 5 people in Washington making the decisions about what bills come to the House floor, and not not having as democratic a process as we would like. So it begins with that first meeting, it goes on with at least monthly meetings, and having that open door policy to actually be able to close the doors, away from the cameras, away from Twitter, and actually start to hash out, all right, what is the first thing that we can do? What's the low-hanging fruit that we can begin to rebuild this trust and say, we can work together, we must work together. And there are a number of issues that we can do that with. Everything from things like infrastructure, criminal justice reform, basic environmental protections, things like clean water and clean air. These are things that are not left versus right. These are things that really do impact and are essential to every single one of us as individuals, the needs that every community has. So this is where I'd begin. This is where I'd begin. And I would continue to engage you. Because what we're doing here, this doesn't end after Election Day. Your going and voting on March 3rd is not the end of the line. It's that continued engagement of holding leaders accountable and making sure that the people's voices are heard, rather than the situation we have now where you have, high-paid, very powerful lobbyists who buy their influence to get a seat at the table, who they can help write the policies that best serve their boss's interests, and that not only leave us behind, but end up having a detrimental negative impact on people. We've got to make sure that our voices break through. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Hi, my question is about criminal justice reform.
Yeah.
I know last night you brought up the First Step Act.
Yes.
And I was wondering, what would your second step be when you become Commander-in-Chief for criminal justice reform?
Thank you. This is a great question. The second step has to do with sentencing reform. We're still dealing with, in many different areas, things like mandatory minimums and others that take the discretion away from judges to be able to really look at the specifics of a specific case or an individual that can help best determine the proper outcome. And instead, I met a guy from Virginia who was going to college, computer science degree. He had 2 minor nonviolent marijuana violations. And because of mandatory minimums, no discussion, no ifs, ands, or buts, that's 2 back-to-back 5-year sentences. 10 years of his life gone. And his cellmate, he shortly after he got out of prison, he came, and I have introduced the only bipartisan bill in Congress that will end the federal marijuana prohibition. And he came there for that. To share his story about what the negative impacts are of this criminal justice. He took full responsibility for himself, but he recognized that his cellmate was someone who had taken another person's life, but he was able to be released from prison before the guy with 2 minor nonviolent marijuana violations. So the first step really had to do with prison reforms, rehabilitation, education, and training, to be able to help best set people up for success. I think the next step really has to be tackling sentencing reform, tackling issues like the cash bail system that so disproportionately negatively impacts people who don't have money. And enacting a policy that makes sense, that you're not making a decision about whether or not someone who is charged with a crime is held in prison or not as they wait for their trial based on how much or how little money they have. It should be based on, do you pose a risk to the safety of your community? That's really what it should be based on. There's a lot of different areas that we need to end private prisons. We need to deal with this school to prison pipeline that we have, where you're seeing kids who are getting into fights and being walked out of the school in handcuffs into a police car. When you look at kids who are beginning to have a record at that point in time, what hope is there going forward into the future? So there's a number of things we need to address that go far beyond the First Step Act. And there is a lot of opportunity in this because we have people and groups who traditionally have never worked together because they're on the progressive side versus the conservative side, but coming together and recognizing this is essential change for so many reasons for our country. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for one last question.
Sorry. Yes, sir. Yep.
Congresswoman, it's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Joel Alba. Our current administration enacted a travel ban that has inadvertently affected a lot of the countries around the world. Yeah. And although they claim that the ban was not a religiously based ideology ban, we've noticed that it has turned into something that is very similar to that. What guarantees can you promise us as citizens of this nation that we'll be able to practice our religion in a free and safe environment?
Thank you. The freedom of religion is foundational to who we are as Americans and to why our country was formed in the first place. We need to recognize that attacks on religious freedom, religious liberty, the weaponizing of one religion versus another, the fomenting of fear and suspicion based on religion, these undermine those very principles rooted in our Constitution that say any one of us has the freedom to worship however we choose, and that we will not be discriminated against based on that, or to not worship at all. That is what the freedom of religion is. And therefore, we cannot be complacent, and we recognize that an attack on any one of us based on religion is an attack against all of us. Because today it may be me, tomorrow it might be you. We celebrate these freedoms. These freedoms define who we are. These freedoms are what provide that beacon of light for others in the world to look to be inspired by. And when we see an undermining of those freedoms right here at home, we know we are headed in the wrong direction. What will I do as president is to provide that leadership, both with the laws and the policies that are now standing up, both through policies and actions and words, for every single American's right to worship or not, however they choose. I have seen in my own life and in my own campaigns been the recipient of my religion being weaponized. I'm a practicing Hindu. My first race for Congress in 2012, the Republican opponent went on national television and said, Tulsi is not qualified to serve as a member of Congress because her religion goes against the Constitution. In another race, re-election, there was another political opponent who said a vote for Tulsi Gabbard is a vote for the devil because she's Hindu. And even in this campaign, we've seen political opponents trying to foment fear and suspicion because I am of a minority religion. And I know that I'm not alone. There are too many examples of this happening in our country, even at the highest levels of our government. And this is a danger to our Constitution, to this democratic republic, and the freedoms that we all cherish. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that we don't have more time to get to every single person's question. We'll be able to stick around for a little bit if you want to come up and say a quick hello or take a picture. We'll make sure that everyone has the opportunity to do that. Before you start moving, we're not lining up just yet. Just hang on, hang on. I'm going to be here. I'm going to see everyone, so don't worry. Have a seat. I love your energy. I just got a couple of more quick things to say. Because what happens next is really the most important thing. I want to ask if you can help me out with something. I want to know you better, and I want us to know each other better. Don't be shy. Raise your hand if you're a Democrat. All right. Raise your hand if you're a Republican. Thank you. Raise your hand if you're independent, libertarian, or green. Or other. Constitutionalist. Awesome. Thank you. I hope you had a chance to look around the room a little bit, because who you are, the perspectives that you bring, and the unity that we have here in this room today is exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly how we bridge those divides. These aren't just empty words. We are making this happen right here, right now. This is real. This is real. And so what you carry out from here will help to expand this positive change, where we feel empowered. We know that we, the people, are the only ones who can make this change possible. Yes, this happens at the ballot box. So I need every one of you to start today, and you're still not sure, if you still have questions, or you still just want to take a look at the other candidates who are out there, I still ask you to think about 5 people in your life that you can share some of our conversation with here today. Some of the questions, some of the answers, some of the takeaways that you have, so that every single voter has the opportunity to make that best and most informed decision. I was asked last night in the town hall, Tulsi, it's hard. There's a lot of people in the country. How are we going to reach everybody? How are we going to make this happen? The corporate media has chosen to basically completely block my whole campaign's existence, or have tried to smear it from day one, which creates some serious hurdles. But here's what we know, is that the more we're able to get our message out to people about the kind of experience and leadership and fresh generation, fresh perspective I bring, the more our support grows. And so this is the help that I want to ask from every single one of you, because whether you realize it or not, every one of you has an incredible sphere of influence. You think about the people you work with, people at school, all the names in your phone, people who you're friends with on Facebook, people who you talk to on Twitter. Whether in person or online, there are great opportunities to just start with one small thing. I don't expect you to go and give my whole speech. Just say, hey, have you ever heard of Tulsi Gabbard? She's running for president. Start there. They say no? Awesome. Go to Tulsi2020.com. Follow her on social media. Check her out. Because I'm bringing a voice and experience to issues that no other candidate is addressing. Most importantly, what I'm talking about, and the rhetoric you may be hearing from others about, well, we need to come together as a country. Well, you can't come together as a country, as a candidate running for president, if you're throwing people under the bus who voted for the other guy last time. We all have to come together. And regardless of who you voted for, regardless of your political party, guess what? In Utah, you can vote for me in the Democratic primary. Do you know that? Yeah. So even as you're looking forward, if you want to send a message to Washington that the same old is not acceptable, that the pay-to-play culture in Washington that is causing such great harm to people in this country will no longer be acceptable, that you have had enough of leaders who say one thing but do another, who are working for their own personal interests rather than the interests of the people, then I invite you to stand with me. Cast your vote and make sure your voice is heard. Not the voices of the pundits and the pollsters on TV who try to tell you what you should think and who you should listen to and who's going to win the election. Only 2 states have voted so far. The third is voting tonight. We have 50 states in this country and our territories who have yet to cast their votes. So don't let anybody tell you, well, this person doesn't have a chance. You get to decide that. And you decide that through the vote that you cast. You decide what message you want to send to Washington. We, the people, our future is in our hands. We must stand together for our country and for our future. Thank you very, very much for being here. Thank you so much. Thank you for your support. Aloha. Aloha. All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be holding lines for the pictures with the Congresswoman in the 2 center aisles. Please use the outer aisles along the wall for exit. Thanks.
Okay. All right. They're going to line up. I'm going to step out for just 1 second. I'll be right back.